Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and most welcome at this meeting of CLINAM, our traditional sessions where we look at science from all angles, wonderful poster exhibition for the new brains, but also we look at how regulatory science and society as a whole responds to the challenges which are emerging, not only in science, but also in society. So it's my privilege today to have a distinguished faculty and to be the co-chair of the European Commission. This is incredible. Maria Pilar is an outstanding member of the European Commission, the Research and Innovation Directorate, and it's really unusual and also very pleasant to co-chair with her. So the topic of this session is about, could not be without mention to COVID. And what is the lesson learned from COVID? What we all as a society have learned from COVID, and what regulators have done to address the challenges of COVID. Not only in terms of clinical trials approval, but also in terms of being transparent in communication with the public, because of course it's a time of great confusion and great stress for everyone. And it's very important that there are institutions like the regulatory agencies and the bodies which are, designated by the people, by the citizen, can have the role also of provider of independent information. We know that various countries and I would say continent have been responding in a different way, but with a shared purpose. So I think that the purpose should be the guide for everyone. Think about the purpose as our lead. And today we have an incredible faculty, because we have Africa, we have Australia, we have Canada, we have China, we have European Union and US representatives, which shows very clearly that science is connected, does not have boundaries. The regulatory science which underpins not only nanotechnology, but all the applications of nanotechnology and other disciplines to focus on patient's health and citizen health is connected. So I would say that the COVID situation would be, for the generation to come, a great case study to see how this demand from public health has driven responses and has made the regulatory science and the political decisions on research investment go in the direction actually citizens wanted. So it's therefore my pleasure to ask our first speaker to intervene and open the debate. And I'm just lost for a moment because I ask my co-chair,
yes,
if it's possible, to introduce the first speaker.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, according to the list of speakers I have the great pleasure of introducing Susanne, but I don't seem to see in the list Susanne Bremen. We know each other because we have worked together, but I don't see her in the list. So
Susanne
maybe
has cancelled her participation in this session.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Then maybe could I invite, because I have seen his name, Dr. Falk Edman, please, from the European Medicines Agency, to take the floor.
Thank you very much. And from my side as well, thank you very much to Pilar and Marisa for considering myself for this very long-lasting organization of CLINAM meetings. And of course, thank you very much as well to Beat, the main force behind CLINAM, never giving up, as we can see now, and always keeping the spirit high. So I'm trying to share my screen now. Let's see whether that works, and please let me know. Can you see the screen now, my presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. So my name is Falk Ehmann. I'm currently chairing the Innovation Task Force here at the European Medicines Agency, and I'd like to provide an update, of course, on nanotechnologies, but as the chairs highlighted as well, a couple of views on our pandemic response, without any doubt, suck up most of our resources at the moment for good reasons. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. And I'd like to start with a quote from our current executive director, which he made in our Regulators Science Strategy 2025. And I think the network, the regulatory network in the European Union and beyond, can be quite proud of this document, which lays out our vision about what kind of scientific developments deserve special attention in the next 5 years. And here, Guido Rasi stated that we need to be ready to support developments of increasingly complex medicines that more and more deliver healthcare solutions. And I really would like to emphasize here healthcare solutions. It is not enough anymore to simply have an efficacious and safe medicine on the market. We need to treat the patient. You need to treat the patient with the right dose at the right time, and treating solutions include as well potentially software solution, potentially apps, potentially getting the patient to the treatment center, software, etc., etc. So it's really healthcare solution we need to deliver, and not only medicines that work. And I come later to this a bit more. So in this regulatory science strategy, there are 5 main goals for the European medicines regulators, and I just like to highlight 2 of them, which I think are really targeting or definitely including nanotechnology. One is catalyzing the integration of science and technology in medicines development. And another one is enabling and leveraging research and innovation in regulatory science. And looking a bit further into the document, what more precisely does it mean? For nanotechnology, it states that develop understanding of and regulatory response to nanotechnology and new materials and pharmaceuticals. And I just listed 3 of the bullet points I could find in here. So generate guidance on PK/PD, including modeling requirements for long-term efficacy and safety. Develop and standardize new testing methods related to the quality and safety assessment of nanomedicines, which I think from the JRC, we can learn a lot from about it. And then understand critical quality attribute of respective products. So these are all written priorities in the regulatory science strategy, which is available online, and I can only highly recommend to read and to study. So now I have a couple of slides in terms of what we do on a very high level to support product development and authorization in our current pandemic situation. So the first thing the European regulator did early in March was to create a task force, a pandemic task force, call it ETF. And this consists of scientific committee and working party members. So the experts, respective experts from member states with relevant expertise in vaccines, infectious diseases, and the different categories like preclinical, clinical, pediatric aspects, quality, and so on and so on. And what they basically do in a very high level terms are they perform or offer early interaction with manufacturers and academia or non-industry investigators. So this really encompasses most of our, or all of our stakeholders. That's the idea. We want to be absolutely holistic here. And they keep in very close touch with the European Commission, Health Security Committee, and the European Center of Disease Control, as well as with other regulators. Because as I think one of our chairs mentioned in the beginning of this session, it is a global thing and science doesn't have any borders. So we need to tackle this together to make it right. So a little bit into the specifics. What do we develop or what do we offer? So of course we have scientific advice, which is normally a 40 or 60-day procedure, but we developed immediately a rapid scientific advice procedure. So at any moment of time, a stakeholder, and again, it's any kind of stakeholder, any kind of individual, can come with her or his ideas, present them to us, and we will start the meter irrespective of any timelines. In addition, we agreed on rapid agreement of pediatric investigation plans and rapid compliance check, which are prerequisites for an authorization of a medicine product in the European Union. And then, of course, we have the evaluation. So there's a rolling review. If a new product becomes available or the evidence becomes available, immediately this can start. There are no timelines. At any moment we can start this. And I think there are more than 3 vaccines now in the pipeline and definitely multiple therapeutics. Of course, we look at accelerated assessment wherever possible, wherever possible and wherever feasible, and about emergency use or compassionate use. And this is a document which I try to cite here on the right, which summarizes all these kind of developments, which I again highly recommend for somebody who's developing or considering developing something in this area. Now then again, nothing goes without international collaboration. And here we have the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, the ICMRA. And they are very, very active in COVID-related activities. They release statements on their website. They have technical meetings, very frequent technical meetings on vaccines. What are for example, the first in human regulatory requirements, designs for phase 3 studies, about clinical trials, treatments, safety follow-up in terms of observational studies and real-world evidence. And they have specific working groups looking for international agreements and biweekly policy meetings. In addition, our agency holds cluster meetings with all the main relevant regulators. Now, this is a summary, but I did it a couple of days ago, and this changed really on a daily basis. But we had contact with around 165 therapeutics on COVID, about 40 vaccines, which have been identified for interaction. And we completed 40 of these rapid scientific advices, and 18 are ongoing, and the numbers might be slightly changed since then. WHO interaction, I mentioned this, but of course, I think it is very clearly stated at multiple sites and multiple regulators say this, we cannot lower the requirements. We cannot have different requirements or different level of security and safety for the vaccines or for the therapeutics we develop. And therefore, as well as good laboratory practice and good clinical practice inspections are to be maintained. Similar here for pediatric investigation plans. So how do we do with the children, which seem to be at least not be the major focus in terms of threat from this current ongoing pandemic. So there are 2 papers here I just like to quote, because I think we heard as well from Marisa before that it is bad enough, this pandemic, but how can we make the best out of it? Or how can we try of this miserable situation, try to really get something positive out of this? And for me personally, working in innovation for a long time now, is what are the new developments? And if you look at mankind in the last hundreds of years, unfortunately in times of conflict, but as well as in times of need, innovations and ideas are to be processed maybe in a faster or in a better way. And I think we can see slight signs of this one as well. And just looking at the different vaccines here, the novel mechanisms of action for these vaccines, which we haven't seen before, and which I'm really convinced of that, we will see more and more in the decades to come. So the last 2 slides, I just like to mention that beside the pandemic, of course, life is ongoing, and we shouldn't neglect any other innovation or development which is ongoing. And there is this informal platform to discuss it with a European regulator. And I really like to emphasize it's on methods, technologies, and medicines. It has to be innovative. It is on scientific, legal, and regulatory aspects, and is free of charge, kind of brainstorming style on innovations in areas without insisting guidance. And in order to make it really accessible, the first step is just to complete a 3-page template. So having a really low hurdle to enter the system. And then we take it from there, how we can interact, collaborate in the best way to bring a development forward. And what is important, I think a wise Chinese proverb says, if you want to work fast, you work alone. If you want to work further, you work together. So collaboration is very important. And as such, a lot of innovation offices have been created now within the member states in the EU. And there's been a network established, the EU Innovation Network, which the EU EMA Innovation Task Force is a part of. And this network really has the vast potential of discussing lots of different aspects, which maybe don't necessarily fall only in the remit of one legislation entity. For example, clinical trials are with the member states, or certain device regulation are with the member states. And this is a fantastic opportunity to discuss it and to provide feedback to the developer, to the stakeholder. And with this, I'd like to close my presentation and thank again everybody for inviting me. I'd like to thank Manuela Mura, who's heavily involved in the ETF, in the vaccine development and evaluation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Falk. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. Indeed, I think that we all agree that it is a global thing. Nobody is going to be able to do it on its own. I think that the other point you made on healthcare solutions as a global and not only a single medicine or medical devices or technology will take us all. And I think that to underline that the rapid scientific advice is something that certainly we are trying to link our research projects to, because we all agree that, really making the time to innovation shorter is essential in here. But let me give the floor to our next speaker, Dr. Michael Johnstone from Health Canada. So please, the floor is yours if you're ready. There you are. Perfect. Yes.
Thank you very much.
See your slides.
There we go. So I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, specifically BIA, as well as the chairs of the session for inviting me to present Health Canada's approach to nanotechnology-based health products, as well as an update on our COVID-19 work. I'll just preface by saying I'm a research scientist, and I'm responsible for the nanomedicines laboratory in the review center that's mainly involved in looking at vaccines. And just a brief disclaimer, the information and views expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and should not be taken to represent Health Canada's views or policies. So just to give a brief overview of regulation at Health Canada. Well, Health Canada is the federal department responsible for helping Canadians maintain and improve their health. And the Health Products and Food Branch is part of that organization that's responsible for the regulation of pharmaceuticals, biologics, and vaccines. And our authority comes from the Food and Drugs Act, as well as its related regulations. So our current approach to the regulation of nanomedicines, we rely on the best science available, either internally or externally. And currently we have no health guidance documents specific for nanotechnology-based products. And because of this, we rely on authorities with our existing legislative and regulatory frameworks. We encourage manufacturers to request pre-submission meetings with the responsible regulatory authority to discuss the information which may be required for the product safety assessment. And since 2011, we've had a working definition that asks sponsors to identify submitted products that may contain nano-based materials. And in reference to Marissa's earlier comments about international cooperation, we work with a number of our international partners on a number of different working groups. So what about our COVID-19 regulatory initiatives? I'll just start by saying we have a landing page that gives the most recent guidance documents and interim orders and information. It can be reached at this web address. It's probably easier just to search for COVID-19 Health Product Industry Health Canada, and you'll get information on our medical devices, drugs and vaccines, as well as our regulatory response. So our main, a very high-level overview of a regulatory response. A special advisory committee was established between federal and provincial ministers or ministries of health, because how health is delivered in Canada, product regulation is a federal responsibility and delivery of health is a provincial responsibility. So this advisory committee allows those two groups to interact more efficiently. The main thrust of our response is the issuance of interim orders. There's been 4 as of October. And these measures expedite the regulatory review of COVID-19 health products. And the aim here is to do that without compromising safety, efficacy, and quality standards. Each interim order is the actual order. There's a guidance document and an explanatory note that associates that interim order as well. We've increased our capacity for scientific review and authorization of testing devices. We've acquired additional resources, so this includes both review resources as well as additional resources in the research division I'm part of. We've enhanced post-market surveillance capabilities, and we've increased our international engagement on this topic. So the 2 main interim orders that are probably of most interest to the audience here would be the first one respecting clinical trials. This was signed into effect in May 2020. These interim orders last for a year. And this interim order basically allows existing or marketed products in Canada to be used for COVID-19 treatments. And this interim order applies to marketed products in Canada or new COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. It prioritizes COVID-19 trial applications. It provides for adaptive clinical trials, and it expedites discussions with sponsors that have products in development and sufficient preclinical data. The second interim order respects the importation, sale, and advertising of drugs in relation to COVID-19. So this interim order expedites the authorization pathways. It provides for rolling submissions and leveraging drugs authorized by a foreign regulatory authority to improve or to increase or decrease the time it takes to approve those drugs in Canada. It also provides for pre-positioning of promising COVID-19 therapeutics in Canadian facilities prior to their market authorization in Canada. As of last Friday, we had 4 products being evaluated under these interim orders, 3 vaccines and a monoclonal antibody. And earlier this year, we had a antiviral authorized in July. We also have engaged in international efforts with our international partners. As you can see, the ICMRA, ACSS, WHO, and so on. And finally, if you have questions or would like to inquire about clinical trials for vaccines and biological drugs or pharmaceutical drugs, these are the 2 emails. Questions for authorizing a COVID-19 drug, pharmaceutical drugs, biological drugs, and veterinary drugs, as well as medical devices. If you're still having problems getting through or finding the correct contact, I'd be more than willing to help you. My email is really easy to remember. It's just michael.johnston@canada.ca. So I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Johnstone. Has been a quite interesting explanation. Particularly, I was very interested in the applications that are now being dealt with in Canada. And also, I'm happy to see that indeed the prioritization of COVID-19, not only drugs and registration of devices, but also the clinical trials, including adaptive clinical trials. So that's quite interesting. I think it is something that aligns very well with the things that I see been happening today in Europe. But let us go maybe to our next speaker, Dr. Chen, Professor Chen from Chinese Academy of Science. Please, the floor is yours if you're ready for it.
Yeah. Hi, Maria. Thank you
Hello.
for your. Hello. Yeah, I'm ready. I will share my screen. Just a moment. Is everything's okay for my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, yes. We see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have several slides to show you about the Chinese progress on this therapeutic and diagnostics of COVID-19 in this year. So here I show you the vaccine in China. Right now we have 13 vaccine has been entered clinical trials. And among them, there are 4 has been in phase 3 trials. So this is quite important for the vaccine development. Actually, in China, we have 5 different type of vaccine. As you can see here, we have 3 inactivated virus vaccines and 1 adenovirus vector vaccine and recombinant protein vaccine, nucleic acid as well. So here, this slide just show you the 4 vaccines in clinical phase 3, which was by 3 companies in Beijing and in Wuhan. And for this supervision from Chinese FDA, actually is very strict. We very strict for the quality of vaccine, and also to monitor the adverse events following immunization. And for the circulation, regulation for vaccine circulation and usage also very strict. The next couple of slides, I will show you the IVD, the in vitro diagnostic products in China. So from this figure, you can see in China, there are 48 products have been approved by National Medical Products Administration. So among them, 17 are based PCR detection. And then the chemoluminescence detection. So you can see here all 48 products. And the requirement for the IVD products, the important thing is the performance. So the NMPA has very strict requirement for this IVD product. So you can see here the quality control and the good performance, good precision, and detection limit are quite low. And after these IVD products, right now, the company, they pay a lot of efforts to develop the integration multiple techniques in one instrument. So they want to make a rapid detection and very automatic applications. So here is one very good company in Guangdong province, and Jin. They allow the PCR detection are very faster and very short in time. So you can see here the performance are quite good. They have a shortened time for nucleic acid extraction, reagent preparation, and higher activity for enzyme, and a higher heating rate. So the method has a good performance. And this is a COVID-19 mobile laboratory. I think this is quite important for the customs, for the airport, for the hospital, for their in situ detection. This is very convenient for the large-scale sampling and detection. And for this purpose, the detection could be very fast. From the sample collection to the result, less than 45 minutes. Here, this is another example from the Capital Bio company. They have developed the respiratory virus detection. So you see here, they combine 6 different virus detection in one kit, in one detection kit. And this is another important, we call it Hawaiian Air Labs. This is by BGI Genomics company. Actually, you can see here, this is Air Labs in Beijing. Actually, this company, they have developed several air labs in the world. This is the first one in Gabon. You can see the picture here, and this is from the outside overview, and this is inside. So this technique can supply the complete, the mobile inflatable BSL-2 laboratory for the very urgent use. Actually, the daily detection capacity is really high. It can detect 100,000 samples in one day. So maybe you know, just 10 days ago in Qingdao, this is one city in northern part of China. We test like 900,000 pupils in 6 days. This is quite efficient. And from the NMPA, actually we have developed several handbook and guideline for the COVID-19. So you can see here, we have guideline for the laboratory. We have guideline for the prevention and control program of coronavirus infection. And we have guideline for diagnosis and treatment. And we have technical guideline for the prevention and control of COVID-19 infection in medical institutions. And we have also the expert consensus on biosafety protection of COVID-19 in clinical laboratory. So this is some guideline developed in China. So that's all I want to share you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Chen. It has been very interesting to see not only the regulatory landscape or the 13 candidates that you have mentioned, but also the pipeline of innovation that we have, you have shared with us. That's quite interesting. The efforts on integrating and decentralizing the testing in particular. So thank you for this presentation. And maybe I would like now to turn to Dr. Wainhall, bear with me my pronunciation, sorry, from United States, the FDA administration. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, now technically challenged. I did find the unmute button. And I assume you can hear me well now.
Yes,
okay.
Clear and loud.
Okay. Thank you. In context of the prior presentations, I'm very grateful that the prior presenters have put a number of context to the activities of the regulatory agencies and how this is communicated and displayed. In my approach today, I am making just a short reference to the existing websites at the FDA in order to get the updated information. It's easily accessible. So I will not focus the discussion on giving you all the details about the latest information that's displayed on the FDA website under COVID, as well as the HHS and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC websites. You will find plenty of information how the agencies work in terms of the status of products in development, the communications about risks and timelines, as well as perhaps some of the challenges that we are facing. In preparation of the meeting, there was a kind of discussion question, I'd say notepad that was shared, and I will try to go through some of the questions that were displayed there. As such, for example, how do we go faster in this context of a pandemic that costs us numerous lives on a daily basis? It is really critical to stay focused and understand what is it that we can do. And I personally am very affected. I lost a very good colleague and friend just a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Michael Waters. He was a frontline worker and he died. And he was also the leader of a very important program that the agency is engaged in called the SHIELD program. This program mainly focuses on coordinating and standardizing the information that is collected in context of diagnostic of COVID through the different diagnostic tests. And if I may illustrate one of the challenges that we have, at least in the US, but probably also globally, I think globally we have about close to 700 or more test systems and test kits that are made, manufactured, and distributed and used for COVID. And these are mainly PCR-based tests. There are some antigen-based tests, and then not to forget antibody detection systems. And this, as good as it is that we have so many tests, it provides also us with a significant challenge, namely the calibration and standardization of the test systems. And just to allude to the fact that, you know, when the PCR methods are done, of course, there are components that are not necessarily revealed in the test results when a physician gets positive versus negative. Many of you who worked in the laboratories know that the CT, the cycle threshold of a PCR test gives very important information as to the quantity, perhaps, of the agent. In this case, coronavirus is present in the test sample. This information is not shared and it's not communicated to the physician. But as you can imagine, it makes a difference if there is a, let me call it, high viral load versus a low viral load, which also can give us some indication in what state of the infection in the phase the patient actually is. So those are all communications that are ongoing in terms of the collection of, let's call it, real-world evidence, namely getting an idea about the epidemiological situation and how far and deep the pandemic has spread, as well as understanding the pathologies and the pathogenesis of the disease. Because it is on that basis that we will and have to make decisions in terms of how to intervene and prevent further communication of the disease, as well as preventing fatalities, treating people better, learning from the treatment experiences and communicating that. Since I started with the SHIELD initiative, this is one of the important components where the agency is engaged through a consortium that involves a number of industry, public-private partnership, and other entities who have come to a consensus that standardizing test results and understanding what the test actually represents is a very important component of providing reliable and reproducible real-world evidence. The decision-making process critically depends on it. The strength of the evidence determines which kind of decisions we are making. And that even goes a little bit further. In many ways, we have tried to also apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to support of decision-making processes. And yet, if you do understand the strength of the evidence of the data that's underpinning it, or the strength of the evidence as determined by the data that's underpinning it, then we have a very difficult time to make scientific decisions. To illustrate just a little bit, when we do collect tests, the test order is not necessarily standardized. The information that's provided to the electronic health records is very limited. There are essentially just 3 or 4 components, which is what kind of test it is, what kind of unit is displayed, and what level of the result. So there's a number to it in most of the tests. In the context of corona PCR testing, as you know, it is often not more than positive or negative. However, in order to understand the epidemiology, there are other data elements that should be included. And just to give you a flavor, when you order a test, it should include the provider name and which system it comes from, as well as the location. When you talk about the test results, it should contain the result itself, the device on which it was performed, like a device identifier. But things like a specimen source is also very critical because, as we all know, it depends where you extract the material from which matrix, and that can have impact on the outcomes. Then, of course, dates are very important, test result dates, the accession number, the specimen ID, the testing laboratory, in addition to the testing device or machine that was used. In the case of the US, the performing facility often has a CLIA number, and of course the location of the testing lab. Now, when we talk about patient information, we know that it would be nice if patients would have unique identifiers. We kind of circumnavigate that in different ways. And yet, when we later on analyze right now even how we report the frequency or the amount of positive corona tests, we cannot easily distinguish if this was one patient tested multiple times over several days, or if it was just a unique patient that has contributed with a positive test result to the count that we display on our websites. So identifiers, names, birth date, information such as race, ethnicity, sex, the location where the patient resides, occupation, other information that might be relevant in the context of living settings, economic background, as well as the symptoms. We do not link the symptoms to a particular test result outcome. And I think that would be enormously important for the epidemiological assessment. In the context of the symptoms, of course, it makes also a difference where the patient has been treated. Was it a outpatient, non-hospitalized patient, or was the patient hospitalized? Was the patient in an ICU setting? To make these questions even more complex, some of you are aware that in the US, we have at least 4 different kind of standardized data collection systems that include PCORMET, Odyssey, ACT, I2B2, and Sentinel data standardization. These are not identical. So in a way, we have to harmonize between the different data systems to be able to communicate and translate between the different data sets that have been collected. So in some relative optimism, the work of the SHIELD consortium has led to the recommendations that are posted on the CDC website that include the standardized data elements that we encourage all laboratories to use when they collect COVID data. HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, has made a request for all laboratories to report the data to HHS and the White House so that this information can be reviewed in a timely manner and decisions can be made on that. The technical challenges practically, however, consist in the fact that many, if not most, of the testing laboratories do not have the data stream requirements to capture all that information and pass it on to the next entity. For example, if a state testing lab has not the flexibility to include all the reporting data elements to the state reporting authorities, the data cannot be easily transferred that way. So all those transfer mechanisms between the laboratories and the reporting entities have not been worked out. And that's, in a way, not rocket science to do it, but there are practical challenges to execute, to rewrite some of the parsing scripts between the different programs that are used to collect the data, as well as standing up a centralized database for HHS and the White House to collect the data in it. To that extent, there are some activities that involve NIH and NCATS to create a database that is suitable for collection of the data. And since I speak about the different entities that are involved, the framework for regulating and streamlining the processes of data collection, evidence generation, and decision-making processes, as you know, in the US are quite complex. It includes the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. It includes the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, with its entities of the National Institutes of Health, as well as the Food and Drug Administration. But we also work with the Department of Defense and BARDA as an agency for countermeasure preparedness. And within the Department of Defense, there are different groups and entities that deal with such threats, including an initiative called Domain, which has set out to review all existing molecules and entities, drugs that can be repurposed in the context of applying it to the pandemic as either antivirals or disease-modifying agents. In this context, there are some interesting findings that are being very intensely worked on. Of course, this is not the only initiative that deals with the question of drug repurposing. And as we know, some of the existing medications can be quite effectively applied. One of the things that we have also realized is that communicating between national agencies and the WHO, for example, when it comes to testing standardization and calibration, is still a challenge. In the US, we have currently over 200 tests approved. And as I mentioned, they are not calibrated against a standard. They are all validated and qualified as a test within itself, but it doesn't mean that the tests are necessarily comparable and compatible. So there are some let's say, desirable communications that we should be mindful of that have to take place in the future, also in a global sense. And the presentations from Falk and Mike have shown how the agencies can communicate also in the framework of the European community and internationally. And I think that's something we have to continue and empathize. So is the framework adequate? I think it's quite complex and it needs to be streamlined. I think one of the important reminders through the pandemic is that we have to facilitate initiative. We have to build on strong leadership and excellent communications and transparency. Again, here, most of the individuals that are involved in those activities have the very best intentions, and yet there are sometimes historic sentiments about red tapes where agencies do not freely share information that would be very useful, not just on a national level, but also internationally, because it contains information that can be certainly applied to dealing with the pandemic in a more effective way. So the agency relies in many ways on scientific expertise that is within the agency, but also relates to advisories with expert panels, advisory boards, and just touching upon the challenge with vaccine development and vaccine approval, which some of you have followed, of course, is discussed extensively in the news, also in the context of the population obtaining sufficient information to have confidence in a new vaccine that has been released and approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Just on Thursday past week, October 22nd, there was a vaccine advisory board meeting that communicated and discussed some of the approval principles for vaccines in terms of and effectiveness, as well as the timeframes over which such evaluations should be monitored and considered. That information is publicly available, so I am not going into the detail at this point. Let me go into some of the other components that are perhaps specific for access of individual patients or the public to innovator drugs and how this can stimulate development and innovation. In the US, we have the mode of a individual treatment into IND that can a physician, a treating physician, in conjunction with the patient's agreement, can request when the innovator, manufacturer, provider gives agreement to the use of this new treatment for this particular patient. But it's a very elaborate process. Some of you have heard this also in the context in the right to try for patients that has been discussed in the past year, where the administration has provided the system greater freedom actually to try new or existing drugs in the context of new applications. And thousands and thousands of emergency individual treatment INDs have been provided, for example, in the context of the antiviral drug remdesivir that we earlier discussed today. And just to put it in the context of emergency use authorizations, this is a situation where the agency looks at safety and risk, and if a product has possible beneficial effects on the condition, the agency can offer or grant a emergency use authorization, which FDA has done in 3 different cases. As you know, the first was hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine for the treatment of COVID, which subsequently had to be revoked because of some of the toxic effects that outweighed the possible benefits. The second one was for remdesivir that now has full approval. And the third one, the third emergency use authorization has been given for convalescent plasma. The challenges with convalescent plasma, I think, lie also in the area of neutralizing or binding antibodies from people who have survived the infection need to be characterized, and that's where we fall often very short. It is a very safe treatment. I think over 100,000 patients have obtained plasma for the treatment of COVID. The safety signals are within the margins that we believe is ethical to provide this treatment. What is very difficult to judge is the benefit and the impact on the course of the disease, because we currently do not characterize very well which antibodies, what kind of antibodies, what level of antibodies are actually in the plasma that is provided to the patient. So levels of neutralization and binding is not characterized for each and every treatment that has been given. And that makes it very difficult to understand also the impact. And I believe that for viral infection, it is not just effective to give neutralizing antibodies, but we have to be concerned about cellular immune response. So cytotoxic T cells certainly need to be induced in order to obtain protection from viral infection. Many of the vaccines target that, of course, and yet publicly we often only speak about induction of antibodies and neutralizing antibodies, which cuts the complexity a little short. Now, certainly antibodies are most often a correlate of T cell immunity and often a correlate of protection from infection. But that's something that the public debate has, in my personal observation, not fully embraced. And let me talk very briefly about some of the activities that we have engaged into in terms of obtaining better real-world evidence and transparency. We have a real-world evidence initiative by ISPOR and ISP. So study processes are defined and coordinated, as well as the reproducibility of results is assessed and analyzed, and certainly data capture and transfer standardization is included in this discussion. We also have the government-supported or sponsored initiative of developing diagnostics in REDEX with the NIH and HHS. We are involved in a national COVID cohort collaborative, N3C, that includes HHS, the CTSA Clinical Trial Network, PCORNet, ODC, TriNet X, and ACT I2B2. We also support the formation of controlled registry networks, CTNs. The registries in its activities need to include symptom tracking and empower patients. The FDA also has engaged in an initiative called Evidence Accelerator that are supported by the Reagan-Udall Foundation and Friends of Cancer. There, the discussions go around specifically the development of and standardization of diagnostic tests, standardization of the test results and data analysis, as well as how clinical trials are conducted, which innovator drugs or repurposed drugs are used in the clinical trials, and how the data is collected. So the data standardization in the clinical trials, the clinical data elements, standardization and transparent analysis and scientific evaluation of the outcomes to, again, steer a gain of evidence and influence decision-making processes within the federal government are very critical. I think those were the main points that I wanted to mention. And I will probably, until there are further questions from the audience later.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you very much for this extensive presentation and bringing the attention, our attention to the data issues, which are extremely relevant. I think that our guest from Pretoria finally couldn't make it because of technical problems. So without further delay, could I invite, please, our last but not least speaker, Dr. Let me see, Field from Australia. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Can I share my screen?
Not yet.
There we go. That's it.
Let's see. Nothing is happening. Now it has. Now it is.
So that's me being getting used to things. So, going the wrong way. Sorry, and I'm queuing the wrong slide. So going right back to the beginning. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone, and it's actually good morning from Australia. And I'd also like to thank Beat and the CLINAM team for inviting me to this session and for giving us all the opportunity to engage in these discussions. So I want to actually start by going back to January 2020. So on the back of a number of years of severe drought and extreme temperatures, large parts of Australia were experiencing the worst bushfire season on record, and Canberra was experiencing the worst air quality in the world. The TGA staff were temporarily relocated to new office accommodation, while our air conditioning system was being upgraded and some of us started working from home, there was a nationwide shortage of P2 masks, so the government was scrambling to increase our supplies. And without help from global firefighting community, which included loan of firefighting aircraft and trained firefighters, this disaster would have been far worse. And so I'm personally very grateful for their sacrifice. And on one of the pictures here, there's the Coulson plane from the US. And unfortunately, one of those planes and its crew were lost during the firefighting. So it was quite a tough time for us all. And then while we were still dealing with the effects of these fires, the first documented case of COVID-19 arrived in Australia on January the 25th and presented to Melbourne Hospital. So we'd already had to deal with shortages of PPE, flexible working arrangements to continue to deliver our essential work under difficult circumstances. And we'd been benefiting from global cooperation. And so basically with COVID-19, that's been the continuation throughout this year. And while the situation for infections are very low in Australia, we're actually doing very well currently. Our international borders remain virtually closed, and we're expecting them to remain that way until effective treatments or vaccines become available. So the Australian government has its COVID-19 vaccine and treatment strategy, which was released. This was released on the 18th of August this year and can be accessed online. The TGA's role in this basically is mainly centred around the regulatory processes to streamline product review and approval whilst assuring efficacy and safety. We've been providing advice to manufacturers on GMP and prioritising those approvals, and consistent with the Australian government's travel advice, TGA suspended all overseas GMP inspections and quality management system audits until further notice. So we've been working closely with our international colleagues and looking at virtual inspections. And as everyone else has been pointing out, our international collaborations have been more important than ever. So we're having greatly increased dialogue with other international regulators. We're working with the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities and the WHO on the international developments and assessment of vaccines for COVID-19. And then more locally, we're actually also working with our colleagues from the Asia-Pacific region to help support them in their response. So in recent years, we in the TGA, we've had some major reforms to enhance our regulatory pathways, and they've been very helpful for us in this period. So we have a priority review pathway, which allows full registration for serious or life-threatening conditions to be achieved, which is up to 3 months faster than the standard approval process. A provisional pathway, which allows for earlier access based on preliminary clinical trial data. We've got our orphan drugs program for rare disorders, and we have a comparable overseas regulator approach, which basically lays out criteria for us using overseas reports from comparable overseas regulators to expedite our evaluations. And then finally, we've got 2 work sharing initiatives. I think Michael's already mentioned the ACCS. It's just recently become the Access Consortium because we've been joined by MHRA in the UK. And then finally, we participate in Project Orbis, which provides a framework for process alignment and management of evaluation issues in real time across jurisdictions. So these collaborations with other agencies have been becoming increasingly more important and help us get through and expedite evaluations, and hopefully can focus more time on the newer technologies. So as I said, these pathways were already in place prior to the pandemic. I mean, we've already got a flexible approach to accelerated approval of high priority medicines and established channels for regulatory collaboration and communication. And in addition, in September, we launched for the first time a new early scientific advice service to support medicine registrations. So for the first time, applicants can request scientific advice on specific data before they apply to register a medicine. So that required a legislative change. We've also recently restructured our clinical evaluation streams. So now we have a dedicated stream for advanced and biological therapies, and that's mirrored by an equivalent scientific evaluation unit for novel therapies to manage the quality aspects. We've got a number of different mechanisms that enable unauthorised products to be lawfully supplied in Australia, and some of these have been particularly important during the pandemic. The clinical trials are obviously one way to access novel therapies. And the TGA doesn't actually regulate these, but we're notified of all clinical trials taking place in Australia. They're approved by a Human Research Ethics Committee, but we do actually review high-risk trials or novel therapies, and we can actually call for review of these if we have concerns. We have a Section 19A exemption process, so we've been using that quite a bit, which allows us to authorise alternative products if there's a shortage of a registered medicine and in the interest of public health. And then we have our emergency use authorisation we have for medicines or for devices, and that's been used quite a bit during the pandemic. It can only be used during a declared national emergency, and it's a means of reducing regulatory burden to allow supply or to stockpile goods in order to prepare for a potential threat. So during the current pandemic, we've taken advantage of these provisions to allow supply of remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, ritonavir, lopinavir, and I think as Frank mentioned, with some of those, they've actually been withdrawn, like with hydroxychloroquine, that's no longer authorised. And in terms of devices, our COVID-19 tests, PPE and ventilators have also been supplied through emergency use authorisation. So these authorisations can have an end date or they can be revoked if information comes to light suggesting the product's no longer safe or effective for those purposes. So in terms of our expedited approval, the provisional registration has already been used. It is a mechanism for rapid approval or to extend indications of an existing medicine based on preliminary clinical data. So it can allow for major therapeutic advance up to 2 years earlier than the normal regulatory process. And the first step in the process is getting a provisional determination to establish eligibility. So the treatment has to be for a serious condition and anticipated to compare favourably against existing treatments or present a therapeutic advance. And the applicant has to have a plan that they're going to submit comprehensive clinical data. So we've used these provisional approval recently for remdesivir, which we gave provisional approval to treat patients who are seriously ill with COVID-19. And we were able to access review reports from the EMA and from Singapore. And then we had a multidisciplinary team which worked around the clock, and we actually approved this product within 2 weeks. And the provisional approvals for a limited time period. It's based on an interim analysis of the phase 3 clinical trial data and the specific conditions of registration can be viewed on our TGA website, which the link's at the bottom. So a transition to full registration occurs over time. So within 2 years, they can apply for extension, up to 2 extensions of 2 years. So if they don't meet the requirements, then the approval lapses. So we've actually just given provisional determinations for 2 COVID-19 vaccines. It was on the 9th of October. So we have provisional determination for the AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines. So now both companies can now apply for their provisional registration. So they'll be starting, and as with the other agencies, we're starting to see rolling submissions, or expecting to see rolling submissions of data coming in soon. And so supply of the vaccine, manufacturing supply is also an issue in Australia. We don't have a very large local pharmaceutical manufacturing base, but we do have one company which manufactures vaccines, and that's CSL, which is a multinational biopharmaceutical company. It was originally a government facility. So a series of agreements have been struck between CSL and the Australian government, AstraZeneca and the University of Queensland for their vaccines to be manufactured locally if they're successfully registered. The University of Queensland vaccine is a protein subunit vaccine which uses CSL's MF59 vaccine adjuvant, and it incorporates a molecular clamp technology which stabilizes the viral spike protein for optimum antigen presentation. It's being developed in collaboration with government preclinical testing laboratories, the CSIRO, and also it's a partnership with the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations, or CEPI. The Australian government has contributed to CEPI, and that's one of the international organisations that established the COVAX facilities. So we're participating in that initiative as well. So finally, I want to highlight some of the work we've been doing in this important regulatory strengthening program for the Indo-Pacific region. And this is a collaboration between TGA and our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We're working with the national regulatory authorities from 7 countries in the region. So that's Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, Papua New Guinea, Thailand, and Vietnam, to build their capabilities and improve timely access to high quality medicines and medical devices. And the regulatory strengthening program will continue to work closely with these countries to strengthen their regulatory capability, and also continuing to pivot to support NRAs with their regulatory response to the pandemic by sharing information on our response and providing technical training on regulatory practices that can be important to responding or preparing for treatments or vaccines. I guess in the interest of time, I think I'll finish with that, but thank you again.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this interesting presentation as well. Indeed, we're running out of time, but I wouldn't like to close this session without giving the floor for some questions. And before, I know that Marisa has at least a couple of them, but before that, I have registered here in the from our the people who's following this event, or this particular session. There are a couple of questions for Dr. Chen from Dr. Calzolai and Dr. Balot. Please, they are asking both actually, if you have the information on performance, sensitivity, specificity, if all this information about the test that you were commenting, or that you were talking about, if this information is publicly available, and they would be very interested in receiving that. So what I would suggest, Dr. Chen, if you want, you can share, if there is information on that publicly available, you may want to share the link in the chat so all our followers can see that. That would be maybe the best way to share the information.
Yeah,
if you have.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, Maria. Yeah, sure. No problem.
Okay. So I will give you a bit of time. In the meantime, Marisa, you want to make to put a question. So in the meantime, we give Professor Chen a possibility to just, share, look for the link and share it. You're muted, Marisa.
Yeah, no, I am muting myself. Thank you very much. I just have a couple of questions. Well, 3 questions. One is really, the first 2 ones are really very much regulatory driven, regulatory science driven. I was just, first of all, impressed by the level of information provided by all speakers. So thank you very much. I really was impressed. It's really the world in one session. And first question is about the repurposing and repositioning. I think that something very specific has been mentioned from Michael Johnstone, been happening in Health Canada, and also from, there was a mention of the initiative called Domain in United States from Frank. And I just wanted to know whether there is anything ongoing on repurposing in Europe. And if the three speakers mentioned could just very briefly say the 2 or 3 attributes of these repurposing projects, because it's something which has been very high in priority in many member states in Europe, also for other conditions. But I would like to know what has been the spin given by COVID-19 situation to the already existing initiatives. If I can start with Michael, who was the one opening that.
So the repurposing of drugs, the interim order allows for a sponsor, an applicant to ask an existing marketed product to be used to have basically expanded indications and a more rapid answer to that question. And then you had mentioned positioning. The interim order also allows the importation of drugs that aren't yet approved. So traditionally in Canada, you can't import a therapeutic unless it's been approved for market in Canada. So by using this pre-positioning strategy, we can import things that are looking promising and then distribute them to the appropriate points throughout the country, to the provinces. So as soon as that is approved for marketing, it's available as quickly as possible.
Very clear, thank you. So it's really pre-positioning, actually. Pre-positioning the repurpose was really brilliant. Thank you very much. Frank? For your domain initiative, is the agency doing something specific?
So essentially, the focus on existing drugs and defining a purpose in the context of the antiviral effects, possible antiviral effects, hygienic enhancement, and of course, influencing the pathogenesis as we learn from the virus what the virus does to the host. There are, of course, this is not restrictive to the domain initiative, but this is the ones that I'm very familiar with and closely working with. In the context of the pathogenesis, there are certainly many other things that have been used, including immune modulating drugs, steroid treatment, of course. There seems to be some strong indication that the suppression of histamine H2 receptor blocking in particular appears to be very effective in preventing the exacerbation of the immune responses that are very destructive and lead to disease progression and fatalities. So leukocytes, neutrophils, mast cells respond relatively well to the suppression of histamine activation and blocking histamine receptors. So histamine receptor 2 blocking by famotidine, for example, appears to be very effective in improving the clinical situation of people who became rather ill and are either entering a hospital or already in intensive care, in conjunction with another component that is targeting cyclooxygenase 2 and prostaglandin and cytokine activation. So COX-2 inhibitors are very effective clinically to mitigate the situation, possibly also due to the fact that all coronaviruses have putative binding site for the COX-2 promoter regions, and inhibiting it appears to make quite a difference in the immune exacerbation. So those are just two of the components that I would like to mention that people are testing clinically. There are a number of case studies 50 case studies that I'm aware of that describe it in the literature. There are a number of clinical trials, outpatient as well as hospitalized patients, planned to involve that treatment regimen. And I probably also should mention in the context that we are leveraging some of the clinical platform trial settings that were used in breast cancer, for example, at UCSF with the I-SPY breast cancer clinical trial platform to conduct COVID clinical trials on a platform basis, where you essentially have the opportunity to roll in a number of possible treatment interventions, treatment agents, and compare it using adaptive trial design and Bayesian statistics to select out these that are most effective and compare it against each other by using other treatment groups as control groups. So there's a master protocol approved for a couple of months now, and we hope to enroll, or it's probably right now that the first patients get enrolled for these off-label use drugs, and we are looking forward to obtain some data soon. The advantage of repurposing drugs, particularly those that are off patent, is that they are inexpensive and relatively easy to make, so that truly could be a strategy globally to treat many patients without running into significant logistics problems.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just, on this, there is a question from Professor Halter to Falk, and it links basically to this, because the question am I reading out loud, it says, do you plan to enable more Toyota Corollas as opposed to Ferrari Superfast as regulator? Apparently, this has been mentioned in a previous talk, meaning lower drug prices for innovative medicines for the broad public, instead of rather expensive medicines for a few selected people. As I say, it's quite provocative, but the question is there. For you, Falk, if you want to take it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So coming to the pricing later, I just want to come back to the repurposing. So as nicely outlined by Frank, so the pathomechanism of the whole pandemic, it's clear it's a viral infection. And I think it turned out that the mortality was mainly due to cytokine storm or autoimmunity from patient. So of course, the first thing
you're muted now.
No, I have been muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So I don't know how much you got, but looking at the pathomechanism of the disease, so we have a viral infection, and of course, a lot of mortality, at least in the first wave, was due to autoimmunity and cytokine storm. So of course, the first thing we look at are antivirals, which insist on the market, because a normal product development takes about 13 to 15 years. So how on earth can we do on a pandemic like this, develop those? So repurposing must be higher on the agenda. And I still think even within a year or so, we see now the first vaccines popping into evaluations and so on. But first wave for such threats, it will be very, very difficult to come up with completely new drugs. So repurposing is a very, very important issue. And I think all the drugs we used in the first wave are even using now, and maybe using quite successfully, but look at the mortality rate, which I think kind of changed between the first and the second wave now, at least here in Europe. Are repurposed. So remdesivir, of course, the corticoids are very helpful against autoimmune cytokine storms, etc., etc. And for vaccines, of course, we look for new ones, but we look at some established platforms as well, and some really new stuff. So yeah, I wanted to come back to two other things which are not exactly in the remit of the agency, as well as the funding, but manufacturing is a big thing. So the Commission, Pilar, you know more about it, is pushing like crazy to put more manufacturing back into the regions, basically, to have the possibility of a rapid response. And this comes back to what Frank says concerning logistics. In addition, decentralized trials, and Frank was mentioning, I think something extremely important, because we must not forget all the other patients who, due to the pandemic, are somehow put into second line. And I'm not talking about COVID patients now, about cancer patients or any other chronic diseases which are treated, operated, etc., etc. And I think the big wave of clinical trials which have been started maybe before the pandemic are still on running or have been stopped or interrupted and so on. What do we do with this? So here I think is a massive push already looking into more digital, more decentralized clinical trials. How can we do this and how can we tackle this? So this in terms of repurposing and so on. Repurposing is high to agenda, but of course we need the evidence as well whether the drug works. But this is our only chance, in my opinion, in very quick responses to use drugs with a similar mode of action which addresses similar pathomechanisms. Now the other question I think you just put forward on the high prices for rare medicines, I think it's very, very tricky. So in Europe, pricing is member state issue. So we have 28 or 27 or 26 different pricing systems, and it's absolutely not in my remit. My personal opinion is that to a certain extent, of course, the market develops or has a certain feedback on the pricing. You cannot ask manufacturers to produce something which is not being paid for. On the other hand, of course, we as regulator and as governments, if you wish so, maybe on a central level from the EC, has a certain responsibility to look for public health, and which is already done very successfully in terms of all the vaccine campaigns, all this free of vaccination, childhood vaccination, etc. But there's, of course, more and very interesting epidemiological work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you and I can indeed confirm that we are looking into these issues with the upcoming new pharmaceutical strategy that will be unveiled in a few weeks. So indeed, we will be looking into that part too. Thank you, everybody. It has been a great pleasure and extremely enlightening session. And I want to thank you again, all of you, for your participation, and also to the audience to be with us today. And with this, I think that we should close the session so you can go to the next one. Beat, you want to say something?
Yes, I would like. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to say that this was a beautiful session, and you have answered to all those questions that we asked in our program. And I think it is so useful in a discussion to have these constructive, hope-making deliveries of perspectives, and not only the daily talking on this. I think you all deserve our great gratitude.
Thank you, Beat. It's good to see you all, and let's continue our work and follow our sense of purpose.
We will come up next year again in autumn with the next summit. I fear it will be virtually. As I told you, we have over the weekend now, this morning, 17,600 infected people. And my CSO, Patrick, is since 20 hours in the hospital. And he tells me that tomorrow it will be per day 10,000 in Switzerland.
Well,
so we are
the best wishes, and let's hope we can curb this very soon, particularly with even more effective hygienic measures and with repurposed treatment strategies, repurposed drugs. I think I suspect we all believe that this is one of the major strategies to get this pandemic under control.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much,
everybody.
Marisa and Pilar, for doing this. You have done a great job.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. I will come back to you again.